have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
I don't ambition power, glory, nor fear, only to share my cause.
And right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side.
Premier Khrushchev has sent a message to President Kennedy today.
December 7th, 1941.
The New World Order. I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision.
Over the years, even the most naive American has had a suspicion that there must be a reason why, most of the time, our government helps our enemies and betrays our friends. Just a handful of scholars have seriously studied the subject. The ones who have done it have concluded that the U.S. government has been hijacked by a group of rich, powerful individuals who have been using it to advance their own private interests. This group has been called different names: the power elite, the insiders, the secret team, the shadow government, the usurpers, the invisible government. I'm talking about the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, and their parasite organizations like the Bilderberger Group, the Trilateral Commission, the United Nations organizations, and the World Forum, just to mention the most important ones of a constellation of organizations working hard for the implementation of a new world order.
The authors who first managed to point to the Council on Foreign Relations as the true center of the conspiracy discovered something amazing. Behind every act of treason to this country, working in the shadows, there is always one or more members of the Council on Foreign Relations or their associate organizations.
The Council claims that it has no affiliation with the U.S. government. Then, how can we explain these facts?
Since the end of World War II, the number of Council on Foreign Relations members in key government positions has been growing continuously. In the last 50 years, all U.S. Secretaries of State and CIA directors have been CFR members. The number of senior members of the armed forces that have CFR membership is growing. The most important people in the mainstream press are CFR members. CFR-controlled philanthropic foundations like the Rockefeller, Ford, MacArthur, and Carnegie bankroll every anti-American group in this country and many abroad. Since the end of World War II, almost every Secretary of State, CIA Director, Secretary of Defense, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, National Security Council member, Federal Reserve Bank Director, is or has been a member of CFR. Also, several U.S. senators and Supreme Court justices are CFR members.
Actually, no other organization, not even any of the three branches of the United States government, has such control over this country. Therefore, yes, no doubt about it, there is an invisible government, a high cabal, a power elite, a secret team, a group of conspirators, infiltrators, usurpers, insiders, or whatever name you choose, who has penetrated the three branches of the United States government and now has almost total control over it. It also controls the mainstream media and public education. Unfortunately, this group is currently in the process of also taking control of the governments of most Latin American nations. And this group of conspirators reside at the Harold Pratt House in Manhattan, headquarters of the Council on Foreign Relations. It is precisely there, at the Harold Pratt House in Manhattan, behind the backs of the peoples of the United States and the world, where a small group of Wall Street bankers and executives of transnational corporations, all of them senior members of the Council on Foreign Relations, are planning and implementing through their secret agents in the U.S. government the creation of a new world order. This new world order, which actually is a very old idea, will be a blown-up copy of the common fascist totalitarian nightmare Fidel Castro has successfully tested for almost half a century in Cuba. So, at least to me, it is an unexplainable paradox that the Bush administration, fully under the control of the most anti-democratic organization in the United States, and after signing a multitude of executive orders curtailing the democracy in this country, claims to be waging a war for establishing democracy in the world. The more I try to understand it, the less I understand it. Unless he has been exporting our democracy, and that may be the reason why we are having less and less democracy here in America.
It should become evident for anybody with eyes to see that the United States, under the control of the conspirators, is rapidly turning into a totalitarian society. Currently, in the United States of America, a country that for many years was a beacon of liberty for the world, the authorities can legally spy, search, apprehend, and incarcerate any American citizen indefinitely, without the right of habeas corpus, legal representation, or a trial by jury. Also, as in a totalitarian country, elections in the United States are always rigged, including the most recent one in 2006, which gave control of the Congress to the Democratic Party.
But this is another disinformational fallacy created by the conspirators and supported by the controlled mainstream press. Actually, the two parties are the two sides of the same coin, which I call the Republican Party. This is the true Communist Party of the United States of America. But it seems that finally, Americans are waking up from their media-induced dream. A growing percentage of the American people, both true conservatives and true liberals, among them several relatives of the victims of the destruction of the World Trade Center, are convinced that the 9/11 events were a self-inflicted provocation, similar to the burning of the Reichstag by the Nazis, carried out by our secret government in complicity with the Republican Party and the media, as a pretext for the implementation of a totalitarian dictatorship in this country. Please don't take my word for it. Go search in the internet and you will soon be convinced, if not that what these people claim is true, at least of the growing number of people who believe it. And don't believe for a moment the disinformers lie that the people who don't accept the government's explanation of the 9/11 events are just a bunch of leftists. Actually, the strongest criticism of the President Bush conspiracy theory explaining the 9/11 events is not coming from liberals or leftists, but from true conservatives.
At the time we recorded this program, opinion polls indicated that 61% of Americans believed that their own government is directly responsible for the September 11th events. Currently, the number of books that point to the U.S. government as directly responsible for the 9/11 events is growing, and they are selling fast.
Unfortunately, most of the authors of these books blame the Bush administration for this tragedy, instead of the conspirators who control the government behind the scenes. But the 9/11 events are not the only ones that claim for an answer.
For For example, how is it possible that the CIA, which has shown a great ability in assassinating leaders all around the world, proved to be so inept in its alleged attempts at assassinating Fidel Castro? Why did the CIA and the FBI persecute, harass, and jail anti-Castro Cubans who were planning to kill Castro? Why did the CIA fuse all anti-Castro organizations in the United States into one and then destroy it after the debacle at the Bay of Pigs? Why in the months previous to the invasion did the CIA stop sending arms and supplies to the anti-Castro guerrillas in the Escambray Mountains? Why did the U.S. government leave the Bay of Pigs invaders in the lurch and fail to provide the air support promised to the invaders, sending them to a sure death? How was it possible that the country with the most sophisticated technical means of espionage failed to detect that Castro was sending troops to Africa, and only found out when he had more than 20,000 soldiers deployed in Angola? Did the U.S. spy satellites fail to detect that the Angolan ports were crowded with Cuban ships? Why did Castro's troops protect the Shell refineries in Cabinda? And why did Shell pay Castro in dollars for this service? How can one explain that after almost 50 years of Castro's allegedly anti-American activity in Latin America, far from damaging the interest of American transnational corporations and Wall Street bankers, he has benefited them? Why did United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan declare that Cuba is an example from which we can learn? What are the secret reasons behind powerful people like David Rockefeller, Maurice Strong, Peter Peterson, and James Wolfenson, all of them senior CFR members, for publicly saying that Castro's Cuba is a model to follow? How can we explain the love between the most reactionary institution in the Western Hemisphere and the alleged most revolutionary leader of the continent? Why was Castro the main force behind the destruction of the traditional pro-Soviet communist parties in Latin America? Why did he make such a great effort in destabilizing and overthrowing democratically elected leaders all around the world? How can one explain the fact that because of the fly of capital from Latin America, for fear of Castro-backed guerrilla activities, the American military-industrial complex and Wall Street bankers engrossed their fortunes? Castro paints himself as an enemy of economic liberalism and globalization. How can we explain, then, his close friendship with Mexican ex-president Carlos Salinas de Gortari, whom senior CFR executives consider the highest promoter of economic liberalism and globalization in Mexico? Why Castro left Guevara in the lurch in Bolivia and thus allowed the CIA to eliminate him? Why Castro first destabilized the Allende government in Chile and later contributed to its overthrowing? If recently surfaced information is true, Allende did not commit suicide. His Cuban security chief, General Patricio de la Guardia, killed him, following direct orders from Castro. Why, based on false information, President George W. Bush sent American troops to the other side of the planet to overthrow a dictator that was no threat to the U.S., but did not send them to overthrow a tyrant 90 miles from America's shores, notwithstanding the fact that this tyrant has threatened and committed terrorist acts against this country, and there is evidence that he has bacteriological weapons of mass destruction. The largest stockholders and true owners of Exxon, originally Standard Oil Company, are the Rockefellers. In Venezuela, Exxon does business through a subsidiary, the Creole Petroleum Company. But it is known that Creole is a CIA creation. Actually, in Venezuela, Creole means CIA. How can we explain that the Rockefellers, who on many occasions have used the CIA to protect their interests, have done nothing to protect their businesses from Chavez, and even sent their agent Carter to consolidate the Venezuelan leader in power?
All these questions, and many more that would make this list too long, are almost impossible to answer by a historian. To an intelligence analyst, however, they would be relatively easy to answer. Actually, the answers have always been in front of everybody's eyes. For example, the answer as to why the US government, under the Wall Street oligarchs' control, has tolerated Castro all these years and now tolerates Chavez is because, far from being a threat to the Wall Street's oligarchs, both of them are secretly working to help the bankers carry on their plans of global dominance. For almost half a century, Castro has allegedly been fighting American imperialism all around the world. But American imperialism is actually the direct result of the illegal activities of the Wall Street bankers and multinational oil corporations that have infiltrated and taken control of the US government. Now, can one find just a single case in which Castro anti-American actions have damaged the interests of the oil corporations and Wall Street bankers? If you know any, please let me know, because I have found none myself. On the contrary, what I have found is that one way or another, Castro always ends up by benefiting the interests of the corporations and the Wall Street bankers he claims to hate. The case of Angola is perhaps the most obvious example, but not the only one. In the same fashion, and despite its anti-Castro rhetoric, the US government, both under Republican and Democrat administrations, always ends up helping Castro. The US embargo on Cuba is perhaps the most obvious example. Far from damaging Castro, the totally ineffective embargo has given Castro the best excuse to justify his systematic destruction of the Cuban economy, its culture, and its people. Every other day I hear some conspiracy theorists airing his suspicions that the CIA has fallen under the control of an evil rogue cabal. But unlike most conspiracy theories about September 11th, this one is totally false. There is no rogue faction controlling the CIA. Actually, the whole CIA is a rogue organization that has never had anything to do with the government of this country and has never worked for the people who foot the bill, the American taxpayers.
Dozens of books and hundreds of articles have been written in which authors blame the CIA for most of the aggressions to countries in Latin America and the rest of the world. What most of these authors, some of them well-intentioned, some of them agents of disinformation, fail to point out is that since its very creation in 1947, the CIA has always been the hidden military arm of the CFR. Though the Council on Foreign Relations describes itself as a nonpartisan organization, whose only goal is to promote international exchanges to reach a better understanding among countries. The reality is quite different. The CFR is actually an intelligence and espionage agency, like the KGB, the CIA, the Mossad, and the MI6, and operates like them. As it happens with most intelligence agencies, it is not a secret where the CFR headquarters is, nor who its senior executives are. But not many people really know what its secret activities are. Like all intelligence agencies, the CFR has listed members and secret ones. Like all intelligence agencies, the CFR has a branch specialized in psychological warfare, subversion, insurgency, and paramilitary operations, functions that until very recently have been carried out by one of its branches, the CIA. Like all intelligence agencies, the main job of some CFR members is to recruit spies and agents of influence as a way to infiltrate other organizations that want to control in the US and abroad. Like all intelligence agencies, the CFR is always looking for ambitious and intelligent, but morally and ethically challenged young people to recruit. Once the CFR talent spotter finds a viable candidate, a recruiter is assigned to his case. If the background investigation is positive, and it is decided to proceed with the recruitment, the first step is usually granting him a Rhodes Scholarship. Successfully passing this first step, they are then offered a grant to study at the London School of Economics. This was, for example, the case of Bill Clinton. Once Georgetown professor Carol Quigley, a CFR talent spotter, detected young Bill, and it was verified that he had the right stuff, he was offered a Rhodes Scholarship. History proved that the selection was the right one.
The CIA is an offshoot of the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services. But contrary to the common myth advanced in books like William Stephenson's A Man Called Intrepid and others, the OSS, also known as the also social because of the high social class of most of its members, was a sort of a joke concocted by the children of the privileged who had discovered a way to avoid fighting the enemy face to face by taking refuge in the universities. Suddenly, they were offered a way to fight a war without getting involved in the messy and risky part of it. Most of the highly touted successes of the now legendary OSS were highly exaggerated, and the military never had any respect for them. This explains why, when the OSS tried to expand their operations to the Japanese front, the Navy told them a thanks but no thanks polite refusal. Most members of the military high command were extremely dissatisfied with the work of this band of arrogant aficionados with access to large amounts of money and lacking in the most elementary techniques of intelligence and espionage. If the OSS did a wonderful job, it was for its Wall Street masters. It had nothing to do with the purported one, and its true goals had nothing to do with benefiting the interests of the United States or its citizens. Unfortunately, this was a vice inherited by the CIA.
General William Wild Bill Donovan, the man the Wall Street bankers and oil magnates selected to direct the OSS, was a Wall Street lawyer and member of the Council on Foreign Relations. His right hand, Allen Dulles, was also a Wall Street lawyer and senior CFR member. Through his OSS office in Bern, Switzerland, Dulles' main job during World War II was actually protecting the interests of CFR members, most of them with strong Nazi connections. Sullivan and Cromwell, the law firm for which Dulles had worked, had strong business ties with the IG Farben, the chemical firm producer of the Zyklon B, the lethal gas used to kill the Jews. At the end of the war, when the defeat of the Nazis was unavoidable, Dulles helped many high-ranking Nazis escape to South America, mostly to Argentina. He was instrumental in the recruitment and eventual escape of General Gehlen, a senior Nazi intelligence officer who later joined the CIA together with a large group of his collaborators. Historically, the U.S. had never had a permanent central intelligence agency. The functions of intelligence and espionage were carried out by the State Department, the different branches of the armed forces, particularly the Navy and the FBI. After the end of the war, President Truman, not a CFR member, caved into pressures from FBI Director G. Edgar Hoover, also not a CFR member, and disbanded the OSS. But Allen Dulles, following Nelson and David Rockefeller's orders, secretly created a private intelligence agency, which eventually became the CIA. This intelligence agency operated from a secret office at the Harold Pratt House, headquarters of the CFR.
Well, in honor to truth, it is likely that Truman actually acted under pressure from J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, not totally acting out of patriotism, but just defending his turf, hated the OSS, and fervently opposed its reincarnation in the form of a central intelligence agency. And everybody, including the president, feared Hoover and his secret files. As head of the FBI, Hoover knew where all the skeletons were kept, sometimes literally, and kept a detailed record of it. But Hoover, who had his own skeletons in the closet, finally caved in, and Truman created the CIA in 1947.
The true origins of the CIA began with the Lovett Committee, chaired by Robert Lovett, a Skull and Bones member closely linked to the CFR. The Lovett Committee was created in October 1945 by Secretary of War Robert Patterson. The function of this committee was to advise the government on the post-World War II organization of the U.S. intelligence activities. Lovett's recommendations allowed the CFR conspirators to create a government organization which actually would be a renegade organization. Hiding under a cover of national security, this renegade organization, which eventually became the CIA, would work secretly to advance the conspirators' hidden goals. The overt purpose of the creation of the CIA was to provide a central organization to coordinate the efforts of the different intelligence services of the U.S. government. But it seems that since its very creation, the CIA's covert purpose was to protect the personal interests of Wall Street bankers and oil magnates. After the end of World War II, Allen Dulles had served as a government consultant. In 1948, after the CIA's failure to forecast the Bogotazo riots of April 9th, Dulles was appointed to chair a three-man commission responsible for assessing the U.S. intelligence system. Particularly, the reasons why the CIA had failed to warn the U.S. government about the Bogotazo riots. The Dulles report was highly critical of Admiral Hillenkotter, the first CIA director. In 1951, Allen Dulles was appointed CIA Deputy Director, and 2 years later, in 1953, he was appointed CIA Director by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The very same year he was appointed CIA Director, Dulles used the CIA to overthrow Iranian nationalist leader Mohammad Mossadegh.
The CIA mounted its first major covert operation to overthrow a foreign government. The target was the Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. He held power legitimately through his country's parliamentary process, and he was popular. Washington had once looked to him as the man to prevent a communist takeover.
The Iranian operation was so successful that they repeated it a year later. In 1954, the CIA planned and executed Operation Ajax. the coup d'etat which overthrew Guatemala's democratically elected president, Jacobo Arbenz.
So with its own planes and pilots, the CIA then bombed the capital. Arbenz fled and was immediately replaced by an American puppet, Colonel Carlos Castillo Armas.
A few months after being elected, Arbenz made a big mistake. He nationalized some unused land owned by the United Fruit Company.
Allen Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles were partners in the Wall Street law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell. Among their important clients was the Rockefeller-owned United Fruit. With John Foster Dulles heading the State Department and Allen Dulles heading the CIA, they were the key CFR secret agents in charge of Eisenhower's foreign policy, and they made sure that the interests of Sullivan and Cromwell's clients were not ignored.
The Guatemalan coup, which cost American taxpayers $20 million, was perhaps a setback for American interests in Latin America because it reinforced the image of an imperial U.S. forcibly affecting the destinies of her Latin American neighbors. It was, however, a total success for CIA Director Allen Dulles and his CFR masters. Initially, the Central Intelligence Agency was structurally divided into 4 different directorates: intelligence, support, administration, and plans. Each one headed by a deputy director. Eventually, the Directorate of Administration disappeared, and the Directorate of Science and Technology was created. The head of the Directorate of Plans, initially named Office of Policy Coordination, was Frank Wisner, a Wall Street lawyer and CFR member.
According to an anecdote, when Joseph Stalin was informed that the Vatican, after knowing that the Red Army had surrounded Berlin with an iron fist, had declared war against Nazi Germany, he laughed heartily and asked, "How many divisions does the Pope has?" The CFR conspirators had an enormous amount of money to enforce their power, which they efficiently distributed through their philanthropic foundations as a way to buy critics and would-be dissidents. But there were some people in the world who refused to get bought. What to do with them? Like the Vatican, the CFR conspirators lacked an army to carry out their military operations to force their will upon rebellious leaders who didn't bend to their money. So they realized that the only way to have their own personal army without alarming the American people was to make it invisible. Therefore, they created it surreptitiously, keeping it hidden under the cover of a legitimate U.S. government organization. Then, using their secret agents infiltrated in the U.S. government, they forced the creation of the CIA, which was just a continuation of the OSS under a different name, down the throats of naive or corrupt American politicians. And the CIA proved to be exactly the right type of organization for that illicit purpose. In the first place, it was free, because American taxpayers were paying for it. Secondly, because thanks to the CIA's characteristic of secrecy, intrinsic to all intelligence services, it was easy to hide its real activities from the American public. This perhaps explains something difficult to understand about the CIA.
The main reason given to the American public for the creation of the OSS and eventually the CIA was to avoid Pearl Harbor-like surprises. But over and over, the CIA has been taken by surprise for events they didn't foresee. The Bogotá riots in 1948, the Soviets launching the Sputnik in 1957, Castro's power grabbing in Cuba in 1959, the Bay of Pigs debacle in 1961, the Soviet missiles in Cuba in 1962, Castro's invasion of Angola in 1975, the fall of the Shah of Iran in 1979, the demise of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990, India's testing of a nuclear bomb in 1998, and the events of September 11, 2001, are just a few cases where the CIA was apparently caught asleep at the wheel. A simple analysis of the CIA's intelligence failures shows that they seamlessly dovetail with CFR's successes. It would appear most of the international political goals of the CFR have been reached thanks to the CIA's alleged failures. This explains why after every alleged failure, nobody at the CIA is ever disciplined, let alone fired. And the CIA's budget is raised. The lone exception was Allen Dulles, and we know what happened to President Kennedy for firing him. Therefore, contrary to the disinformers' claims, far from accumulating failures, the CIA has always been one of the most successful tools used by the conspirators, entrenched at the Council on Foreign Relations, in their pursuit of their hidden goal, the creation of a communo-fascist global government controlled by the Wall Street bankers and oil magnates corporations, what they euphemistically call the New World Order.
James Jesus Angleton, the legendary CIA chief of counterintelligence, was convinced that the KGB had infiltrated several malls at the CIA's highest levels. With the benefit of hindsight, it seems that Angleton was right. The CIA had been penetrated by enemy malls. But the malls were not agents of the Soviet Union, but of the Council on Foreign Relations. And, paradoxically, Angleton himself was one of the malls. If the actions of the CFR malls infiltrated inside the CIA and the US government have benefited America's enemies, it is because one of the CFR's goals has always been the destruction of America as we know it. In their struggle to attain this goal, the conspirators have been using America's enemies as proxies. And there is no doubt that they have been highly successful.
The CFR conspirators never gave any weight to the allegedly most important CIA directorate, intelligence. This explains why, since its very creation, the CIA has accumulated failure after failure in the area of intelligence collection and analysis. But they were very careful in making sure that the director of the CIA, as well as the deputy director of plans, and his close senior collaborators were all trusted CFR members, thus guaranteeing an absolute control over the area that really mattered to them: covert military operations. Actually, the other directorates were just a convenient cover to hide from the American public and the rest of the CIA's employees the true activities of the CIA on behalf of its CFR creators and masters. This explains the true cause of most of the CIA's intelligence failures.
Many well-intentioned, dedicated CIA employees have worked their whole life for the CIA, retired, and died without realizing that they had been recruited under a false flag. So in their pledge of allegiance, they have sworn to defend their country against its enemies, foreign and domestic. Unknowingly, they have worked their whole life advancing their interests of the people who want to destroy this country.
Most likely, it was here, at the Harold Pratt House, headquarters of the Council on Foreign Relations, where the initial plans for the CIA's first large-scale psychological warfare operation, now known as the Bogotazo, were laid down. A new agent they recruited in early 1948 played a cardinal role. This secret agent was sent to Bogota, Colombia, on a secret mission. Once there, acting as an agent provocateur, he coordinated the assassination of Colombian populist leader Jorge Eliezer Gaitan.
This new secret agent the conspirators had recruited was a young Cuban university student named Fidel Castro.
His first mission consisted in traveling to Bogota, Colombia, planting false evidence and creating false clues implicating the communists in the assassination of Gaitan and the Bogotazo riots. He was very successful. It was not a coincidence that U.S. Secretary of State George Marshall was in Bogota at the time, presiding over the 9th International Conference of Latin American States. Following the plan, the day after the tragic events, Marshall blamed the communists for the assassination of Gaitan and the riots. The Bogotazo PSYOP marked the beginning of the Cold War in the Western Hemisphere. It was effectively used by the CFR conspirators to plant the fear of communism in the minds of the American and Latin American people. The fear of communism became an excellent cover for the CFR conspirators to hide their true activities of exploitation and control. Since then, Fidel Castro has never stopped working for his CFR masters, initially through his CIA controllers and later directly with them. As a way of payment for his important services, Castro's CFR masters have allowed him to continue working unmolested in the systematic destruction of Cuba and its people. In the process, growing his numbered accounts in Zurich. One of the areas in which Castro had proved his worth had been his mastery in attracting fools, like Che Guevara, the Ortega brothers, Hugo Chavez, and more recently some Muslim leaders, and recruiting them under a false flag to fight Yankee imperialism. One of the techniques favored by intelligence services all around the world is the creation of their own controlled pseudo-opposition to create Hegelian-type managed artificial conflicts. And the CFR conspirators have made an art of it.
The mysterious explosion of the French freighter La Coubre in Havana Harbor, the Bay of Pigs invasion, the guerrilla wars in Latin America, the invasion of Angola, the death of Che Guevara, and the assassination of Presidents John F. Kennedy and Salvador Allende, the shoot-down by Castro's mix of 2 American civilian planes, just to mention a few, were CFR, CIA, Castro joint operations planned by the CFR conspirators. At some time, Orlando Bosch and Eden Pastora realized that the CIA-Castro mixture was very unhealthy, and that saved their lives. Francisco Camaño, Jorge Ricardo Massetti, Salvador Allende, Che Guevara, and many other gullible fools like them discovered it too late and paid dearly for their big mistake.
On February 24th, 1996, Castro's MiG shot down 2 unarmed American civilian planes over international waters, killing 4 Americans. The planes belonged to the Miami-based Brothers to the Rescue organization, an anti-Castro group providing help to rafters escaping from the island. A month before, Leslie Gelb, then president of the Council on Foreign Relations, had visited Havana and had private meetings with Fidel Castro.
Was this another CFR-CIA Castro joint operation? Some people have speculated that Gelb gave Castro the green light for shooting down the Brothers to the Rescue planes. Moreover, it seems that the terrorist act that destroyed a Cuban airliner in 1973, killing all passengers, including the Cuban Olympic fencing team, was also a CIA-Castro joint operation of self-provocation.
The main clue for this suspicion is that Beatriz Marquez, a Cuban singer in vogue at the time, was visiting Venezuela on a tour and was scheduled to fly back to Havana that night. But a few hours before, somebody important ordered her not to take that flight. At the time, Marquez was married to a senior officer in Castro's security detail, and that saved her life. The poor boys of the fencing team unknowingly played an important job. They provided Castro with martyrs for his revolution. In the same fashion, and despite the dense curtain of disinformation created by CFR secret agents, there are abundant clues pointing to the possibility that the assassination of President Kennedy had been also a CFR-CIA Castro joint operation. Moreover, everything seems to indicate that the flooding of the U.S. with drugs from South America has also been a joint CFR-CIA Castro operation, a sort of opium war planned by the CFR conspirators to destroy the moral fiber of the U.S. as a way to facilitate the establishing of a totalitarian regime in America.
Of course, as a key CFR secret agent, Castro also played his role on behalf of the Wall Street bankers and oil magnates in the fateful events of September 11, 2001. Currently, with the support of sub-agent Hugo Chavez, Castro is carrying out an important Hegelian-type psychological warfare operation against the people of Latin America on behalf of his CFR masters. The goal of this operation, similar to the Bogotazo but on a continental scale, is to scare the hell out of the ruling classes in Latin America with the fear of Castro Chavism. A large portion of the nationalist Latin American ruling class fear the growing economic penetration and political influence of Wall Street and American transnationals in their countries, and were reluctant to accept the new free trade agreements with the U.S. But the CFR conspirators used the fear of Castro Chavism as a strong factor to force them into accepting first the Central American Free Trade Agreement and later the Free Trade Area of the Americas as the lesser of two evils. The conspirators were right. The Castro-Chavez psyop is bringing the expected results.
The Central America Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA, and the Free Trade Area of the Americas, FTAA, are just previous steps toward the creation of the American Union, which would extend from Alaska to Patagonia. The American Union, under the total control of the Wall Street bankers and oil magnates through their international financial organizations, and if necessary with the help of U.S. Special Forces, will bring the destruction of the economies of the Latin America countries, the extinction of the middle classes, the enrichment of a few, and the impoverishing of workers and farmers. Exactly as Castro has done in the Cuba the CFR executives admire so much. Playing a key role in this process is the International Monetary Fund, IMF, an institution created and controlled by Wall Street bankers. In an article he titled Neo-Bolsheviks of the IMF, Russian economist Georgy Arbatov made the best description of what the IMF really is. According to Arbatov, IMF officials are neo-Bolsheviks who love expropriating other people's money, imposing undemocratic and alien rules of economic and political conduct, and stifling economic freedom. Arbatov is right on the mark. The IMF has been the main cause of the economic disaster of all countries who have fallen under its economic control. No wonder the economic measures imposed by the IMF have been dubbed shock treatment. Like in the psychiatric treatment of the same name, patients are not killed during the treatment, but suffer its terrible consequences the rest of their lives. The brainwashed American public went to the polls with the wrong belief that by bringing the Democratic faction of the Repucratic Party to power, things would change for the better. They were wrong. Once more, Americans have been shortchanged. After taking control of Congress, members of the Democratic faction of the Repucratic Party are talking about a new direction in American domestic and foreign policy. If there is any appreciable change, it will be a tactical one, just enough to make gullible Americans believe that there has been a true change. But the CFR secret agents infiltrated in both factions of the Repucratic Party will guarantee that the overall strategic goal will continue being the same, destroying this country as we know it, and bringing about the communo-fascist tyranny of the New World Order.
You can bet that in the coming presidential election in 2008, the Repucratic candidate elected will be a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And this president will appoint even more CFR members to key government positions than previous presidents. And no serious non-CFR controlled commissions to investigate the 9/11 events will be created. And the borders will remain open, and the process of changing the U.S. into a third world country will continue uninterrupted. And things, as usual, will keep going from bad to worse. And the president American voters will elect in 2008 most likely will be the last president of the United States of America as a sovereign nation. Soon after, the United States of America will disappear as a sovereign country after fusing itself with Canada and Mexico into the new North American Union. For almost a century, these people have been waging a quite non-declared war of attrition against the American people, and it seems that they are now ready for the final decisive battle. Unfortunately, as the recent midterm elections shows, the American people have reacted against the puppets, leaving the puppet masters untouched.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control.
This is Truth Lies, and I am Servando Gonzalez.